My name is Rachel, and I never thought my own father would betray me. Losing my mom was the most painful thing I had ever endured. She was my rock, my safe place, the one who always believed in me. When she passed, I clung to the one thing she left me: her inheritance, her legacy, the proof that I was still connected to her. I thought my father would protect me, that he would honor her memory. But instead, he and my stepmother looked at me like I was nothing more than an obstacle standing in their way. It started small, with whispers and suggestions. "Rachel," my father said one evening, his voice oddly calm, "your stepbrothers and stepsister deserve a share too. Your mom loved them like her own." I froze. That wasn't true. My mom tolerated them, but she never once said they should inherit what she had built. That money, that house, those savings were all from her side of the family, her years of sacrifice. My stepmother chimed in, smiling that smile I had always hated. "It's only fair. Family shares, Rachel. Don't be selfish." Selfish. That word pierced me. For years I had watched them shower their own kids with gifts, vacations, opportunities I never got. I was the afterthought, the daughter from his first marriage, the ghost of the woman they all pretended to love. And now, the one thing my mum had left me, they wanted to carve apart like vultures. I tried to reason with my dad. "Mom worked her whole life for this. She wanted me to be secure. You can't take that from me." He looked away, ashamed, but he didn't stop her. My stepmother leaned closer and whispered, "Oh, honey, we'll take it whether you agree or not." That night, I cried in my room until my chest ached. But crying turned into something else: resolve. They thought I was weak. They thought I would fold the way I always had, let them walk all over me. But not this time. This time, I was going to fight back. The first thing I did was visit Mom's lawyer. I remembered her telling me once, "If anything happens to me, go to Mr. Callahan. He'll know what to do." Sitting across from him, I slid the will across his desk, my hands shaking. He read it carefully, then looked up at me with steady eyes. "Rachel, this document is airtight. Your mother made sure of it. Everything is legally yours. They can try to manipulate you, but they cannot take this unless you let them." Relief flooded me, but it was mixed with anger. My stepmother had been lying, pretending she had power she never had. Instead of confronting them right away, I decided to let them dig their own graves. I recorded conversations, saving every little word they threw at me. "Sign the papers, Rachel," my stepmother hissed one afternoon, sliding documents across the table. "If you don't, you'll regret it." I glanced at the papers. They were full of legal jargon, essentially signing half of my inheritance away. I pretended to be scared, played the obedient stepdaughter role one more time, and said, "I'll think about it." Inside, I was burning with rage. Days turned into weeks. They grew impatient. My father stopped calling me sweetheart. My stepmother stopped pretending to like me. They wanted my mom's house, her savings, her jewelry, all of it. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't planning on giving them a single penny. The day of reckoning came when they tried to corner me at a family dinner. The table was set. My stepbrothers and stepsister grinning as if Christmas had come early. My father cleared his throat. "Rachel, it's time you signed. We've waited long enough." My stepmother pushed the papers toward me again. "Do it now, dear. It's the right thing for the family." I stood slowly, every eye on me. My hands didn't shake this time. My voice was steady. "You want me to sign? Fine. But you might want to look at this first." I pulled out my phone, tapped play, and their voices filled the dining room. My stepmother's hiss, my father's silence, their manipulations, all recorded, all undeniable. Gasps erupted around the table. My stepmother's face turned white. "You recorded me," she shrieked. I smirked. "I protected myself, and I've already sent copies to Mom's lawyer. If anything happens to me, if you try to threaten me again, it all goes public." The will is legally mine. You can't take a dime. My father's face crumpled. He looked at me with shame, but it was too late. The damage was done. My stepmother stood there shaking. Her plan shattered in front of everyone. My step-siblings stared at her, horrified that the lavish lifestyle they had been promised was slipping through their fingers. I leaned closer, looking her dead in the eye. You called me selfish. You tried to steal what wasn't yours. But now you'll have nothing. And every time you walk through this town, people will know exactly what you are. A liar, a thief, and a fool. I walked out of that house with my head high, the weight of my mother's legacy secure in my hands. I didn't just take back what was mine. I took their power, their confidence, their ability to ever make me feel small again. They thought they could erase my mother's memory. Instead, I made sure her legacy would crush them every time they looked at me. That was my revenge. Not just keeping the inheritance, but making them watch as I lived the life my mother wanted for me, while their scheming destroyed them from the inside. And I swear, I could still hear my mom's voice in the back of my mind, proud and strong, saying, "Good girl, you finally stood up." My mother used to say that some people only understand boundaries when they crash into them. I didn't understand what she meant until after she was gone, and my father brought a stranger into our house and called her wife. I told myself I could survive the tight smiles and the new rules. The way my stepmother rearranged the kitchen, like she was erasing fingerprints. The way she said we when she meant me. I told myself grief makes people clumsy. I told myself to be patient. Then the envelopes started arriving, thick with forms, and my father sat me down at the dining table where my mother used to write Christmas cards, and asked me to sign away half of what she'd left me to keep the peace. That was the night I realized patience was just a prettier word for permission. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I looked at my father, his hands folded, eyes avoiding mine, and asked him why he would ask me to betray the one person who had never once betrayed me. He said something about fairness, about blending families, about how my stepmother's children were like mine now. I stared at the corner of the table where my mother had once caught a mug on the edge and left a crescent moon dent in the wood. He changed the subject the way cowards do, by pretending the question had been answered. My stepmother hovered in the doorway, smiling a smile that never reached her eyes. "It's only right," she said, and the word right glinted like a knife. The next morning, I took my mother's will to Mr. Callahan, the lawyer she trusted. He was older now, softer around the middle, but his eyes were the same steady blue. He read in silence, while I stared at the ficus by his window and tried to breathe around the lump in my throat. When he finished, he tapped the page with a fountain pen. "Your mother was precise," he said. "She named you as sole beneficiary. She listed specific items and accounts. She anticipated pressure." He slid a stapled packet across the desk. "Here is a memorandum she left with me. It's not legally binding, but judges read. She wrote that if anyone tried to force you to share, you should contact me, and I would remind them of the meaning of the word will." He smiled without humor. She had a sense of irony. I walked home with copies in my bag and a spine that felt a little taller. When I opened the door, my stepmother was at the kitchen counter with a stack of papers of her own. "Good timing," she chirped. "We've drawn up a simple agreement. Just signatures, darling." She laid the pages out like a dealer out for blood. I picked them up and read them. Every line a trap, every clause a siphon. This would transfer 50% of my inheritance into a joint trust managed by you and my father. I said flatly. She blinked, surprised that I could read. "For the children," she said, like the words were a lullaby. I smiled without my teeth. My mother already chose her child. She called me selfish. She said my mother would be ashamed. I looked her in the eye and said my mother had never been ashamed of me, a single day of her life. For a week they tried a new tactic every day. Love bombing on Monday, guilt on Tuesday, Fury on Wednesday. On Thursday, my father arrived with a pastor who didn't know our story and tried to sell me forgiveness like a coupon. On Friday, my stepbrother sent me a video of him walking through my mother's garden, murmuring about how he'd love to build a fire pit for the family, right where my mother used to kneel and prune the roses. On Saturday, I bought a small recorder and slipped it into my pocket before I went to dinner. Sign tonight, my stepmother said, sliding a new set of papers toward me. These ones dressed in friendlier fonts. Let's not drag this out. If I sign, I said, letting my voice wobble, you'll stop calling me ungrateful. She didn't answer that directly because the truth was ugly on her tongue. If you sign, she said smoothly, we can move forward as a family. And if I don't, her smile vanished, and there she was at last, the woman who had been waiting for permission to show herself. If you don't, she said, low and quiet, you will wish you had. My father cleared his throat like he wanted to be a good man and didn't know how. Rach, I brought something, I said, cutting him off. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope Mr. Callahan had prepared. A letter on firm letterhead, outlining the terms of the will, the statutes that supported it, the penalties for coercion, the consequences of tampering or attempting to unduly influence a beneficiary. I set it beside their papers. If you try to force me, I said, we go to court. If you threaten me, we press charges. If you trespass again, I call the police. I watched understanding bloom and then wither in my father's eyes. My stepmother's smile returned, smaller now. We would never threaten you, she said sweetly, the way snakes promise not to bite. I didn't expect them to stop. People like that don't stop because you ask nicely. They stop when it costs more to continue. So I went quiet and got busy. I changed the locks on my mother's house. I installed cameras facing the garden, the back porch, the driveway. I moved the heirlooms she'd listed by name, the locket, the quilts, the box of recipes in her handwriting, into a safe deposit box. I catalogued every piece of jewelry, photographed every painting, scanned every document. I gave Mr. Callahan copies and bought a little fireproof safe for the rest. I told my closest friend where the keys were and what to do if I stopped answering my phone. I started a folder labeled If. They escalated as expected. My stepmother's daughter sent me a text that read, Mom says you're being dramatic. Be a team player for once. My stepbrother posted a photo on social media with a caption about inheriting responsibility. A shot of my mother's front steps blurred in the background, like a trophy he hadn't won yet. My father left a voicemail asking me to think of your siblings, and I saved it because the word siblings had never belonged to me in his mouth before, and I wanted the evidence of that lie. The break-in happened on a Wednesday afternoon. My neighbor, Mrs. Patel, called to say she'd seen my stepmother's car in the driveway while I was at work. I thought you should know, she said, and I blessed her nosiness. When I pulled up 10 minutes later, my stepmother was on the front porch with a man in a polo shirt, a clipboard in his hand. We're taking inventory, she announced, as if narrating a make-believe show. To help you. I looked at the camera above the door, then back at her. Leave, I said. The man shifted, uncomfortable. Ma'am, I was hired to appraise. By whom? I asked. He gestured weakly toward my stepmother. Then you're trespassing, I said, and I called the police while she sputtered. When the officer arrived, she turned on the tears like sprinklers. He looked at the deed in my hand, my driver's license, the letter from the lawyer, and then at her. Ma'am, he said, you need to go. She glared at me all the way down the steps, like rage could melt locks. That night, I forwarded the footage to Mr. Callahan and sat in my mother's old chair with the quilt over my knees and let the shaking happen. When it stopped, I wrote a list. At the top, I put the word survive. Under it, I wrote protect. Under that document, And at the bottom, in a hand that grew steadier with each letter, I wrote revenge. Revenge wasn't slamming a door. It wasn't a single dramatic scene at a dinner table. It was paperwork and patience. It was letting them show everyone who they were, while I stacked proof like bricks. It was saying no, again and again, until the word became a wall. They tried to go around me. They went to my mother's sister and told her I was out of control. They went to my boss and hinted that I was unstable and might misuse funds. They went to a judge and filed a petition claiming I was hoarding assets meant for the family unit, attaching a letter my father signed that said my mother had expressed a desire for the children to share. The judge scheduled a hearing, and my stomach dropped for 1 hour before Mr. Callahan called and said, "Calm as a lake. It's going to be fine. We filed a response with the will, the memorandum, the statute, the video of the appraisal attempt, the text threats, the voicemail. We attached a letter from my mother, written in her careful print 3 months before she died, that said, clearly and without adornment, I leave my estate to my daughter because she will honor it. No one else is entitled to what I built." At the hearing, my father didn't look at me. My stepmother did, eyes bright with performance. She spoke first, a story thick with words like fairness and family and intention. She cried once on cue. The judge listened without interruption and then turned to our side. Mr. Callahan spoke like a man reading a recipe. Ingredients, measurements, oven temperature. Will executed on this date. Witnessed by so-and-so. Memorandum delivered. Statute 732-5002. Statute 731.201. He didn't need to be passionate. The paper did it for him. When he finished, the judge adjusted her glasses and said something that made me want to laugh and sob at the same time. "A will is not a suggestion," she said. "Petition denied. That should have been the end." It wasn't. Pride doesn't concede. It mutates. A week later, my stepmother held a family meeting at their house and invited people who had never taken my side to begin with. She told them I had dragged my father through court, that I was trying to punish them for moving on, that my mother would be heartbroken by my cruelty. She forgot that grief doesn't make me deaf. My cousin sent me a recording. I listened to my father say nothing, while lies were arranged like flowers, and decided my revenge would be educational. I started with the truth in public. Not a rant, not gossip. I wrote a measured post and attached the judge's order, blacking out account numbers and addresses. I wrote, "My mother left her estate to me. There has been pressure to share it against her wishes. A judge affirmed her will. I appreciate everyone who has respected her decision." I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The town can add 2 and 2 when you hand it numbers. The comments filled with people who had known my mother, who remembered her working double shifts, who remembered her paying for school supplies out of her own pocket for other people's children. They wrote about generosity and intent and boundaries. They wrote about me by name, saying my mother would be proud. My stepmother posted a vague, bitter quote about greed wearing a halo. It got 4 likes. I could have stopped there. I'd won the paper war, but my stepmother had tried to dismantle the life my mother built. And I wanted something more durable than a court order. I wanted a legacy that would outlive both of them. So I met with Mr. Callahan again and told him I wanted to set up a small scholarship in my mother's name at the high school where she'd volunteered. For kids who don't have someone to help them with application fees, I said. For kids who've been told to share what isn't shareable. He smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes. "I'll waive my fee," he said, and I believed him. When the scholarship fund was announced, my stepmother tried a new song, the "We Support This" chorus, sung through clenched teeth. She posted the link and called it Our Family's Initiative. I commented once, politely, with the truth. It was my mother's wish and my gift. "If you would like to donate, the link is above." She deleted my comment. The internet does not forget screenshots. The next time she tried to rewrite my sentence into hers, a dozen people replied with the image and a short note. No, the last move they attempted was the pettiest and therefore the most useful. My stepbrother showed up at my mother's garden one afternoon with a shovel and a cooler, claiming Dad had given him permission to plant something special. He didn't see the sign I'd posted by the gate or the little camera nestled in the camellia bush. He didn't see me until I was standing between him and the flower bed. "Leave," I said. He rolled his eyes and took a step like a boy who has never been told no. I took my phone out and dialed. "Hi, officer," I said when dispatch picked up, loud enough for him to hear. "It's the trespasser again." He froze. He left. I sent the clip to Mr. Callahan, and then, on a whim, to the high school principal with a note that said, "I'm sure he'll grow out of this." The principal replied with a single sentence that meant more than he knew. Good boundaries make good neighbors. My father came by that evening alone. He stood on the porch where he'd once taught me how to tie my shoes and looked like a man who had misplaced something essential. "I never wanted it to get like this," he said. I could have told him it had always been like this, just quieter. I could have asked him when he decided love was a finite resource he had to ration. Instead, I opened the door enough to look him in the face. "You let her call me selfish," I said. "You sat in rooms while she planned how to carve up what Mom left me, and you called it fairness. You asked me to hand over the last thing she put in my hands, so you wouldn't have to argue in your kitchen." He flinched. He stopped. "I thought you'd be okay." I laughed once. "I am okay," I said, "because I stopped asking you for permission to be." He asked if there was any way back. I told him there might be a way forward, and it looked like three things: an apology spoken in rooms without me in them, a firm no to any further discussion of my mother's estate, and a donation in his name to the scholarship fund he did not start. He nodded slowly, the way men nod when they're not used to being told what decency cost. We stood there a minute longer. Then he left. When the first scholarship recipient stood on the auditorium stage with a certificate and a grin too big for his face, I felt something inside me unclench. I heard my mother's laugh in the back of my mind, the one that sounded like a door opening. After the ceremony, the guidance counselor squeezed my hand and said, "You turned something ugly into something that grows." I walked home in the early evening light and watered the roses and didn't once look over my shoulder to see who might be watching. Revenge, it turns out, is not the slam. It's the structure. It's the paper you file and the locks you change and the quiet you keep until you need to speak. It's the refusal to hand your story over to people who will replace your name with theirs. They tried to take my mother's legacy and fold it into theirs like a borrowed napkin. I took it back and stitched it to my own name in thread they can't cut. Sometimes I pass my father on the sidewalk. Sometimes he pauses, like he might say something more. Sometimes he does. "How are you?" I tell him the truth. "Better." My stepmother still posts pictures with captions about gratitude that sound like threats. She still smiles too hard at parties. People still nod like they believe her. But there's a new thing in their nods now: doubt. That's not my doing alone. That's the judge's gavel. That's the scholarship newsletter. That's the town's ability to add. That's my refusal to sign what was never right. I keep my mother's locket in a dish by the front door. I touch it when I leave the house and when I come home. I don't ask it for permission. I don't ask it for strength. I just say, out loud sometimes and quietly, others, I kept it. Not just the money, not just the house. I kept the self she believed in. I kept the boundary. I kept the promise that when people tried to take what didn't belong to them, they would find a wall where they expected a welcome mat. They called me selfish and dramatic. They called themselves fair. When it was done, the only names that mattered were the ones etched on the plaque we hung in the school lobby, my mother's and mine, and the names of kids who will plant their own futures in dirt that respects their roots. That is the ending I chose. That is the revenge I took. And if anyone asks how I did it, I will tell them the truth my mother taught me without meaning to. Build your no like a house, then live in it.